Jesus said to the Pharisees, "I'm going away, and you will look for me. But you will die in your sin. Where I am going, you cannot come." He said to them, "You belong to what is below. I belong to what is above. You belong to this world, but I do not belong to this world. That is why I told you that you will die in your sins. For if you do not believe that I am, you will die in your sins." So they said to him, "Who are you?" Jesus said to them, "What I told you from the beginning. I have much to say about you in condemnation, but the one who sent me is true. And what I heard from him, I tell the world." They did not realize that he was speaking to them of the Father. Jesus said to them, "When you lift up the Son of Man, then you will realize that I am, and that I do nothing on my own, but I say only what the Father taught me. The one who sent me is with me. He has not left me alone, because I always do what is pleasing to him." Because he spoke this way, many came to believe in him. Please be seated. On the cusp of World War II, the King of England, to strengthen his country, gave an address at Christmas where he quoted a poem from earlier in the 20th century. "I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, 'Give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown.' And he replied, 'Go out into the darkness and put thine hand into the hand of God. What shall be to thee better than light and safer than a known way?'" Tilly Majic lived out this poem in her life. She was a woman who lived with her hand in the hand of God. In 1908, she was living in Poland, married, and was giving birth to her firstborn son, Joseph, although she was only 16 years old herself. Wanting to offer more to her son, she immigrated with her husband to Chicago. Throughout this time, even in a new country, she stayed close to Jesus Christ, to her Catholic faith, and her church. She raised her son, Joey, in the church. She taught him right and wrong, and she kept her own relationship with Christ close to her heart. This new country was good to them, and they were growing until December 9th, 1932, when Joey was 24 years old. You see, it should have been a great, great time for them. Joey was married to Helen, and he had come home that day and found such incredible news. She had baked a great cake, and she whispered in his ear, "You're going to be a father." Now, that very same day, not far in the neighborhood, there was a police officer, William Lundy, on patrol. And he stopped into a delicatessen owned by Vera Wallish, another Polish woman. But he would never leave. While he was there, he was brutally murdered. He was the 6th murderer of the week in Chicago. None of the murderers had any suspects. And Chicago was going to be hosting in a few months the Century of Progress. The mayor was angry, and he made it clear to his police department, we need a conviction. We can't have people dropping, we can't have people murdering the police. So around December 20th of 1932, Tilly's son was home with his wife and a neighbor, Ted, who was staying with them out of fear. And they get a knock on the door from the Chicago police and were taken into custody. There was no evidence. There was no witnesses who could place them there. And they had positive witnesses who could say that Joey was at home, nowhere near the scene of the crime. But those were ignored because a conviction was needed. And so Vera, who twice could not pick Joey out of a lineup, was given a choice. You see, it was during Prohibition, and her delicatessen was also a speakeasy. Either identify him, or we take your place and you go to jail. So she identifies him, and he and his friend Ted are given 99 years in prison. The Depression would go on. We would enter World War II, and really, Joey Maciek would be forgotten. Prohibition would end, and much of the violence in Chicago would go a different direction, and it would be completely forgotten. Until October 10th of 1944, there was a simple ad in the Chicago Daily Times which read, $5,000 reward for the killers of Officer Lundy on December 9th, 1932. Call GRO 1758 between noon and 7 p.m. In today's dollars, it would be $80,000. This caused a young reporter to look at it and show it to his boss. They were intrigued. And so he assigned it to James McGuire, who had been a former private investigator, and a writer, Jack McFall. And they called the number. And who they got was a middle-aged Catholic woman speaking in broken English, whose name? Tilly Maciek, Joey's mom. She knew that her son was innocent. Not like most of us parents who often say, my child could never do this. They are so innocent. She knew in her core that she had taught him the Catholic faith. She knew that he wasn't there on the day of the crime. And when everyone else moved on, she did not. But she never became bitter in the least. She remained full of hope because she had an absolute belief and trust in God. And she had been living Lent for 11 years. From the time that her son was picked up till that moment on October 10th. You see, she had not stopped praying every day, throughout the day, that somehow God would free her son. She had not stopped fasting. Although she was poor, she had took a job scrubbing floors in one of the office buildings in Chicago. She would walk a long distance to get there. She would never pay for a bus because it would ruin her plan to have a reward. She would never buy herself a cup of coffee or any extravagance for 11 years so that she could save any possible penny so that the reward would be big enough for somebody to finally notice it in the paper. And she certainly was willing to give alms because every penny that she made, she was trying to give away to anybody who could find the real color of the police officer so that her son would go free. So when they heard this story, they weren't so sure. James and Jack were used to people saying that they were innocent. But there was something so intriguing about this mother, about her absolute faith in her son. And her plan was simple. You see, she had already run the ad many times before with the amount of money that she saved. She was going to keep scrubbing those floors the rest of her life. And whenever she could afford another ad, she would put it in with a higher amount. And somehow these two men were convinced. They were convinced that Joey was innocent. They would visit him, they would reopen the police records, they would go back through the trial transcripts, they would go through old newspaper articles, they would go to the prison, Joey would take a lie detector test, and they thought that they finally had it. They thought that they would be able to free him, and they hit a snag. And the governor asked the newspaper to back off. It was becoming so intense. So they were going to stop writing the articles. And the editor said to them, "Are you going to let Tilly find this out in the newspaper? Are you going to tell her?" So Jack goes to tell her that her hope was for naught. She had so believed. You can still find these articles. They're readily available. She thought it was so clear that her son was innocent and that someone had believed in her. And she believed that Jack and James were her friend because they were willing to believe, to write the articles to save her son from prison. So he goes to tell her. And she says, "You cannot stop now. You cannot stop. We are so close." And he said, "We have nothing more to go on." And he turns to leave. And she says, as he walks out the door, "Oh, how foolish I have been. Oh, how foolish I have been." And you're led to believe that she's foolish because she believed that she could actually help this to happen. But that's not the reason that she's foolish. Because you see, in her bedroom, Above her dresser is a rosary, a crucifix, and a candle. And hanging upon the wall is the image of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And what she recognizes is her only foolishness is when she said to the reporters, "So now I have no friends." And she looks at the image of Jesus and his Immaculate Heart. And she says, "Oh, how foolish I have been. I have always had a friend. I have you." And she strengthened herself to go back to scrubbing floors. But what happens is, as her prayer continues on, it actually happens. The governor frees her husband. They acknowledge that he was wrongfully put in prison. It had never happened in Illinois before where they apologized and said, "We got it wrong." Because to this day, they still don't know who murdered Officer Lundy. They just know it wasn't Joey Maycheck. What's amazing further about this story, the newspaper and the reporters did not take a dime of that $5,000. They left every cent of it with Tilly. And the main writer, Jack, when this was made into a film, never took a penny for any of it. At some point, they came to realize that it was a moral obligation, that their conscience was tweaked, that there had to be light to overcome the darkness. I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, "Give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown." And he replied, "Go out into the darkness and put thine hand into the hand of God. What shall be to thee better than light and safer than an unknown way?" Tilly Maycheck was Catholic. She believed this statement. And from the time that she was a little girl, she put her hand into the hand of God. And when everyone turned on her son, she didn't. And she knew that Christ had not. And when no one else could see the truth or the light, she could see clearly. Her Lent lasted 11 years. Ours has lasted about 45 days so far. Pretty soon, we'll go back to our own way of life on Easter. But if we want this to be a different year and a different light, then I ask you, a follower of Christ, are you walking with your hand in his hand? If so, you don't need any other light.